Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a video about this angel sword, kind of type 14-ish or fantasy-inspired arming sword kind of looking thing. Anyway, before I get into the spiel about this particular sword, it's actually going to be the first in a series of videos I'm doing about the angel swords that I happen to have in my collection at the moment. I thought I'd share some of the dynamic properties and all of this, that, and the others that I happen to have, since not a lot of people share a lot of things about this manufacturer. To that end, there are some caveats, some disclaimers that I should probably note. First and foremost, I'm not affiliated with Angel Sword in any way, and nobody's asking me to do these reviews. I just have these in my collection and thought I would share them. Two, I didn't get these as review samples. They were all bought either secondhand or swapped out or traded or something with Angel Sword. I'll talk about how that process worked for me later on in the review, but in a nutshell, know that I bought these with my own money. They're not review samples, they weren't given to me, that type of thing. The other bit to note is that I am not an expert in swords. I'm just an enthusiast, a passionate guy who likes all sorts of sharp, shiny swords, and so take what I say with a grain of salt. It's my opinion. I'm not an expert in historic European martial arts or any bladed martial arts, and so there you go. A little bit about Angel Sword before I continue with the spiel. Angel Sword is a manufacturer out of the US. I think they're in Texas, and they tend to make these swords and sell them at Renaissance festivals. They make a variety of swords in terms of typology, and all of them I would say are kind of historically inspired artistic interpretations of swords. I'm not sure exactly how they qualify it, if they're trying to mimic something in history. If they are, I think they're missing the mark, at least in terms of the general construction. I'm more familiar with the Japanese stuff, and in later videos I'll talk about some of how I think their construction misses the mark from how some of those swords are meant to be used in the martial context that they're in. Anyway, I digress. The point is, if you like the sword, it would be available at a Renaissance festival. That's where they sell most of their wares. They're also pretty expensive. This is one of their baseline swords, and it's about $2,500 or $2,000-ish if you were to buy it at from Angel Sword. I paid a little less because I got it secondhand, but nevertheless, they are pretty expensive. The other bit is the Angel Sword has, like a trade-in policy, so if I didn't like the sword, I could bring it in and trade it towards something else, so long as I was paying 20% more. That's a possibility. They're sharpening the swords for a cost of a beer at the Renfest, or rather they make you bring them a beer, which is cheeky, but I suppose fun and cheap in the context of sharpening. Overall, though, they have some interesting controversies that also go around them. Some years ago, I made a review about, or not a review, but a rant about Angel Sword. I'll put a link in the video description down below if you want to hear more about the controversy. I don't really want to get into it in this video to keep it short, but anyway, know that they're an American Smith. They sell stuff at Renaissance festivals. None of the swords are supposed to be the same, but some of them look remarkably similar to me. In any case, on with the review. So first off, typology-wise, this is a type 14-ish. Now, don't get mad at me, because I know it's not a type 14, but as I try to categorize this sword and put it in a box, that would be kind of the closest blade profile I could see, but there are some obvious things that make it not quite the same as that. And I'll talk about the dynamics, but I will say that I like the overall look of the sword, with the exception of this bit here. And let's start there. This is the pommel, and it's not really a pommel. I don't know what the purpose is here. It doesn't, maybe I can get my pinky on it, but I don't feel like I can really get any purchase on this part of the sword, and it's, it's fine for what it is, but it just looks like, it looks like a vice to stop the sword. Like we were going to put a pommel on, so we put this pin on, and we're going to attach one later, but we just didn't get to it. In any case, I'm not a super big fan of this aesthetic look. It looks unfinished to me, but alas, that's a personal take on the assembly or the fit and finish side of things. And this is, I suppose, one point that Angel Sword gets a lot of flack for, is their fit and finish, how they're assembled and how they look. A lot of people are not a fan of the artistic style that the owner uses, or that the company uses when they assemble their swords. In some cases, I like them. In some cases, I don't. In this case, I'm not particularly a fan, but that's a subjective thing. At least in terms of holding the sword together, it does fine. In terms of acting like a counterweight, though, well, let's talk more about the grip. The grip is enormous. It's huge. It's also really hard. I don't know what is under here, but I would suspect a pipe of some sort. It feels it doesn't have any give like wood. I think it's just a big pipe. And the hilt lets me get, or the grip lets me get almost 2 hands on it, which is a little weird for a sword this size. And it looks like it's just made for Andre the Giant. It would be like a knife for Andre the Giant, is kind of how this... I have big, meaty sausage hands, and it's tough for me to get a grip. When I fling the sword out there, this thing wants to kind of lurch itself out of my hand. But I think there's just a ton of weight in this kind of pipe grip here, which is part of... I suppose part of what's keeping it together. Now, if you wanted to smack somebody with a pommel, it might actually do a little bit more damage given its size. But the counterweight, I think, is largely coming from what's underneath this grip. The grip itself has like this snake skin kind of wrap on it. There is a seam that's pretty easy to identify, but it doesn't come loose through the process of me holding it. And I've had this for a few years, and I bought it secondhand, and it hasn't come loose or undone. So in terms of reliability, it seems to be well affixed to the blade. We can move up to the crossguard now. The crossguard has this kind of weird washer that sits on the grip, and aesthetically I don't like how this fits. Again, it looks like it just wasn't finished, wasn't sanded down, wasn't brought to the right taper. But then the crossguard itself, it's really on par. I've seen things from Mr. Pierce that look kind of similar in terms of general assembly. The thing is that they're not sanded as accurately. This kind of has a lot more unevenness in terms of this hexagonal shape that's being attempted here. There are some artistic embellishments as well, though there's little like hammer marks along the surface of this piece that give it at least some panache, some sort of aesthetic look, and it appears to have been aged in some sense. It's at least symmetrical this way, but as you look at the hexagonal little pieces here, they are slightly different shapes. It gives it a sense that it's handmade, and I guess I like that part. I'm not really opposed to things not being symmetrical. It looks like that was the attempt here, and it was missed, so it's worth noting. But it is nice to see that there are elements of being handmade versus machine-made, though a lot of this has some machining elements to it as well. And we can talk about that when we get to the blade. Now, the first thing I'm going to note about the blade is that the way this is assembled, there are very little surface ripples in the surface of this steel. It's one of the flattest, cleanest in terms of grind lines that I've seen in a European style sword. It has a higher polish than what I'm accustomed to seeing on most European swords that often have this kind of satin, Scotch pad looking polish to them. This one has a little bit more of a mirror polish, but you can see it's not just the conventional buffing. It also has these fullers in here which look like they were just kind of ground in. They're on there, they're nice, but they just have this very machined element look to them, as opposed to it looks like it was on some sort of metal lathe or something to that extent, because they just have a very harsh and impersonal kind of look to them. But I do overall honestly kind of like the actual aesthetic. I like the look of them, but it has this weird balance aesthetically of being like handmade and machine made. In any case, the sharpness level is what I suppose Angel Sword is pretty well known for, and in this particular sword, it is exceedingly sharp. It does a great job cutting tatami. I am not an experienced cutter, and it's hard for me to kind of index this blade given the size of the grip, but for how large it is, as well as kind of where the point of balance is, I really didn't have any trouble cutting. But that brings me to the general purpose, or the general talk about dynamics. And this sword is really, really interesting from a dynamic perspective. I don't know about interesting, like wrong, maybe, but in a Type 14, I think you would be using a shield, and you'd want something that had kind of more heft in the chop. Some years ago, I actually had an Arms & Armor Henry V sword that was within a ½ inch in terms of length of this sword, and weighed also 2 pounds and 14 ounces. But this sword felt like you were really connected to the tip. It felt very controllable, but all the weight just feels like it's in the base of the handle. And the Arms & Armor piece wanted to lurch out of your hand. It kind of felt uncomfortable in the chop because it was very tip heavy. This one is the opposite. All of the weight is in the handle here. The point of balance is kind of right at the end of this ricasso section here, and it gives it this sensation of being very lively. Like I can put the tip exactly where I want it to go, but at the same time in the chop it feels like it doesn't have any weight there. So sharpness wise and cutting wise, in terms of at least tatami mats, I had no problem kind of cutting into tatami. It cut reasonably well, but the complaint I would have wouldn't necessarily be the balance. It would actually be that this grip wanted to lurch out of my hand. It didn't feel well. The other thing to note though is that because of the balance, like you'd think this little kind of light whippy sword would be something comfortable, it actually is very taxing on my arm. It wears me out pretty quick. This is a heavy sword, and even though dynamically it has the profile of something lighter, it's still very heavy, and that means it kind of wears me out. It's weird to have this lively but dead feeling at the same time. It has like the zombie profile. It's very weird in that it's very lively, but it kills me like a heavy sword. Anyway, that's the bit from the dynamic perspective. I'm going to put a link to the weapon dynamics computer as well as the measurements in the description down below, so you have them. In any case, that's what I have for you on this sword. The Angel Sword, do I think this kind of thing is worth it? You really have to like Angel Sword to find value in this kind of thing, because if you're a historical guy that wants some sort of tie to history, there are other smiths that are making things more historically accurate, certainly, than Angel Sword does. If you want something to use in a martial art, well, there's probably people out there making something that is more suited or a better tool for a martial art. If you want something that's fun in backyard cutting that you can wear with your garb to a Ren Fest, something that you can trade in if you don't like, I think there's certainly a market, a purpose, and a reason for Angel Sword to be out there, and I think they do a good job. All of the swords that I've had from them have cut exceedingly well, despite their sometimes very weird profiles. So they do the job in terms of what they're intended to do, but at the same time, they miss the mark, at least for many of the buyers out there. So I like swords. I have a lot of them. To me, I think it's not necessarily a bad deal, though I do hesitate knowing how many other custom smiths are out there, how many other custom forges are out there. What else $2,500 can get you to pay $2,500 for this? It's certainly not for everyone, though it is fun, and dynamically I think it has just a different take on things, and it's fun, but it's certainly far from the right thing for everyone. Anyway, that's what I have for you about this here sword, and I'm going to stop there. As always, cheers, and thank you for watching.